So what we're talking about today is the polished stone slabs and Opus Sectile tiles from the Promontory Palace at Caesarea Maritima, or Caesarea Maritima, and what you can learn from a box of rocks. Now at Banyas, I literally had one box of rocks. Here we had 28 crates, okay? First, a little introduction to the Promontory Palace itself. In this particular case, I'm working with Barbara Burrell and Kathy Gleason, who are not archaeologists, but landscape architects, who are both in the States. They worked with Ehud Netzer on his dig, and then after he passed away, then this part of the excavation reports have gone to them to complete. The Promontory Palace was built in two sections. First, we have the lower palace. It was built sometime between about 25 and 15 BCE. It was 4 ranges of buildings, probably 2 stories high, that surrounded a freshwater pool. Today it's saltwater, but anyway, then it was a freshwater pool. Later on, the upper palace was added from about 15 to 10 BC. This was added. Here there was a large courtyard, and it seems that most of the building here was to the north side of the courtyard. A lot of this area here has washed into the sea, so I'm not really sure how much they've discovered down in this area, but it seems that most of this though was to the north of the courtyard. When we go the other day, you're standing on the railing looking out to the sea, and straight down from you, you will see a floor. It's a mosaic floor that was the triclinium of the lower palace. Out here, there was a peristyle courtyard, and then you had a large freshwater pool, today saltwater. And this is where the, the ranges, I couldn't think of the word, the ranges of buildings stood on either side, the south, the west, the north, and here on the east. If you look at it from above, here's the lower palace area. There's the pool. Evidently, this picture was taken at low tide because there's not a lot of water in there. Here was the lower palace, and here is the courtyard for the upper palace. Here's where most of the rooms have been discovered. Like I said, there may be some things here and here, but I'm not sure how much because a lot of this has been washed away. Now, during the excavation periods, there were several different groups who were working in this area. The Italians were working over here in the theater area. So all the excavation reports about this have come from the Italians. The IAA was doing the Herodian levels of the hippodrome over here, plus the Byzantine levels of the Byzantine city. I would call this a city. It's not a village. This was the Byzantine city up in here. So this was the responsibility of the Antiquities Authority. Meanwhile, Ehud Netzer from Hebrew University, and at that time, Kathy and Barbara were both at University of Pennsylvania. They were down here in the lower palace excavations. And in the middle of this whole thing was a very large parking lot. And nobody had any clue as to what was under the parking lot. So the IAA, in planning ahead, said, okay, if there is something under there, we will draw a line in the sand. Literally, they drew a line in the sand. And they said anything to the west of the hippodrome here would be excavated by Hebrew University. Anything to the east of it would be excavated by the Antiquities Authority. Well, what they didn't know was they had drawn a line right through the middle of the upper palace. That's because they didn't know the upper palace was there at the time. It was only later on when excavation started in that area, they realized they had chopped this building in half. So the material I'm dealing with is from the Hebrew University and University of Pennsylvania part of the dig over here. The IAA part is Sefi Perat and Yossi Patrick, Peter Gendelman, Rivka Gerst. They're the ones that are on the IAA side of this. So my material just comes from this part over here. As far as history, we know that during the Herodian period and then on into the early Roman period, this building started out as Herod's private palace. It then became a public building. This may have been the Praetorium of Pontius Pilate. During the late Roman period, this building continued on in use. This is not like a lot of the other Herodian palaces that got wiped out, destroyed, whatever, torn apart, occupied. It stayed on as a public building in the late Roman period, and then later on in the Byzantine period, it continued in use during that period. But part of the question is, how long into the Byzantine period? The objectives of the study, at first it started off with, what can we say about what King Herod was using in the way of decorative stone tiling? And then what was the nature of subsequent renovations that were done there during the late Roman and Byzantine periods? What we didn't expect to find, but this was sort of a bonus, was this idea of when did the palace finally go out of use? And it was very odd that we actually were able to figure out something and push the dating of this building as being used almost a full century after what the IAA was saying from what they had discovered up on the eastern part of the palace. What I had to work with were 1,500 stone slabs and Opus Sectile tiles. They came to me from storage at Moshav Zephyrim, brought them here to my house, immediately put them out on my Merpeset because they were full of bugs and little critters, and slowly worked my way through all of them, cataloging all the different stones. They're all different sizes, shapes, colors, materials. But the problem was they are mixed up dating, going from the beginning of the palace, at the beginning of Herod's time, Herod's building of the palace, all the way up till the time that it was destroyed, sometime towards the end of the Byzantine period. So it's a 700 year mishmash of stones, and they don't come with little date marks on them with manufacturing dates on them. First off, I tried to identify what comes from Israel and what is imported. The imported materials include marble, breccia, alabaster, granite, and porphyry. In a minute, I'm going to go back to the last picture and show you what I'm talking about. And then the local stones are limestone, bituminous chalk or bitumen, and calcite alabaster. You have to remember that there's no natural sources of marble here in Israel. So I'm going to go back to the last picture, find a back arrow. Okay. This is what you usually think of as marble, nice crystalline stuff. Okay, you know that one. Breccia. Now this word, B-R-E-C-C-I-A, here in Israel tends to be pronounced by the archaeologists as brexia. I have no clue where they got the pronunciation. It is an Italian word. Ask an Italian, they'll tell you the word is pronounced breccia. It is this kind of a conglomerate where you have different pieces of stone that are then held together by some kind of a matrix or cement. In this case, this is something called Porta Santa. You see some dark inclusions. Here's some lighter ones. Here's some medium color ones here. And the cement in this one is sort of a crystalline color or a white color. Here's another breccia here. The inclusions are cream colored, and the matrix or the glue in here that holds it together is a pinkish, is a purplish brown color. Here's another here. This one's Africano. The inclusions are this cream color with the red speckles in it, and it's held together with a green to grayish matrix. This is alabaster. Now this is imported alabaster. This is some local alabaster. If you haven't caught my explanation before of what alabaster is, if you go into a cave that has stalagmites and stalactites in it, the stalactites are the ones that hang down from the ceiling. The stalagmites are the ones that are on the floor. That, remember the word stalagmite, it might eventually meet the other one coming down. Okay. If you slice off or carve a stalagmite, you get all this beautiful, beautiful layering in it. So alabaster, here in Israel, bahat. Bahat is a sliced or carved piece of a stalagmite from a cave. Porphyry is this kind of stuff right here. It's sort of like granite. This is a red porphyry from Egypt. It's got red with pink speckles in it. This one over here is from Greece. It's got rectangular little specks in it. The first time I saw this stuff, I thought it was modern manufactured fake marble countertop or fake granite countertop. Then I found out, nope, it's real. This one is from Greece. This is a breccia. This is breccia de Tiberias. It's from an island. It's a Greek island just off the coast of Turkey. So that's the different kind of materials that are in here. This is actually a limestone that has calcite crystal veins in it. Now we'll go continue back on with this again. Okay. Now the materials that we have at Caesarea, whenever I work with a site, I make this map. Okay, in this case, it's for Caesarea Maritima. So our materials are coming from the areas that surround the Aegean Sea, here on the coast of Turkey, and then on the coast of Greece. There are a few things that come over here that come from Tunisia, the Giallo Antico or ancient yellow. There are Greco-Scirito quarries over here, but recently some more were discovered over here in Turkey, and it makes a lot more sense that ours came from Turkey. We do have materials, granites and porphyries come from Egypt, and then the local materials, limestone, bitumen, and calcite alabaster. Now, the imported materials. I'm not going to go through and explain every one of these, but I'm going to point out certain ones because they're going to come up over and over and over again. Some of the ones that we keep seeing in Herodian palaces are this Africano, which is from Turkey. Like I said, this is a breccia. It's got the cream with red speckles in it, held together in a greenish gray matrix. We're going to see a bunch of this alabaster fiorito. That means flowery alabaster, very pretty. We also have, this is some Egyptian alabaster here, some different other breccias, and Bigio Antico or ancient gray from Turkey. Some more red marbles, green marbles. Here's the Giallo Antico. Remember that word. We're going to see a lot of this one. Here's a granite from Egypt, a white stone called Greco-Scirito. It's got little tiny lines in it, and people says, oh, it looks like Greek writing. So they call it Greco-Scirito. And we'll see a lot of this, the Proconisi marble that comes from Turkey. Mica schist, Occidentavoni, Pavonazzetto, we see a lot of. Here's the two porphyries again, the red one and the green one. Porta Santa, you're going to see that word over and over again. Semisanto, slate, not sure where we got the slate here. And then Verde Antico or ancient green. Some of our local materials, the bituminous chalk or bitumen, the calcite alabaster, which is from the caves that are around here, and a whole array of different colors of limestones. These are all local, and they come in every color of the rainbow. Now, where does the bitumen come from? It comes from down here at Nebi Musa. To get there, drive down Route 1, make a right turn at Nebi Musa, go into the parking lot and park your car in the parking lot of the Han, and hike yourself about, 100 meters north, and you'll find the ancient quarries. I went down there about a year and a half ago with a group of archaeologists and geologists. This is over here on the right is Amos Frumkin. He's a geologist at Hebrew University. A lot of you may know Nachshon Zanton. He was one of the head archaeologists on the Step Street project. He's now working on his PhD at Tel Aviv. And the tall, skinny beanpole over here, of course, is Roy Farad. And the other ones, I don't remember who was who because I met them all that day when I was there. But these quarries were cut into the side of the hill. All this white stone that you see here, it's not white, it's black. Okay? Don't let your eyes fool you. Bitumen is chalk. It is chalk that is impregnated with petroleum products. Once the stone is exposed to the air, the oil in the surface begins to evaporate. And so after a few months or weeks, or in this case, many years, it looks perfectly white on the outside. It looks like white chalk. It's not white, it's black. So I had somebody help me with a before and after picture. He took his little pickaxe, knocked off a piece of it, and you'll see here, this stuff is perfectly black on the inside. So any of the bitumen, if you just leave it out and exposed, will eventually turn white. If you want it to stay black, just put oil on it and it'll stay black. The local calcite alabaster caves, we have the Abud caves, which are north of Mota'in, and the Teomim caves, which are to the east of Beit Shemesh. One of the most famous things to come out of one of these caves is the calcite alabaster bathtub from Kypros. This was carved from one solid block of calcite alabaster. Our question is, how did they get that thing up the hill? It weighs a ton. Okay, I have some stones here from Caesarea. They didn't really match the bathtub, but we have something else lying around here. Okay, over near the Temple Mount in the Davidson Park area, right by the Umayyad palaces, there's
you just showed up?
Pardon?
What?
There is a piece of a calcite alabaster column. If you want to see this, go over into the Davidson Park area around the Umayyad palaces. Archaeologists are digging right there right now. So this thing has been moved a couple times, but just ask them where the alabaster column is, the Amud Bahat. They will point at it to you and point it out to you, and you can go take a look at it. I took some of the pieces of stone and I compared them to what I had. Here's the kind of flat layering, and this is the cross section of the layering. You can see how much it matches this column right here. So I am pretty sure that these slabs here from Caesarea came from the same cave that the column did. The problem is the archaeologists are not quite sure which of the caves it came from right now. And maybe Abud, but it may be another cave that's up in that area. The first task was trying to determine the materials that came specifically from the Herodian period. And the only way to do this was to go and look at what was found at all the different Herodian palaces. So we're going to take a look at the Opus Sectile tiles that came from Banyas, Tiberias, or Tiberia, Caesarea, Kypros, Jericho, Herodium, Masada, and over at Machaerus to see what they were finding there, because this is going to tell us what of the material at Caesarea is typical from Herodian palaces. I've been working on this for about 10 years. I've worked with all these different palaces. I have studied every single tile that came out of every one of these palaces. So we'll go first to Jericho. This is Herod's Winter Palace. This triclinium here was paved with someplace between 25 to 26,000 tiles. And in here, we have at least 9 varieties of imported stones, plus bitumen, limestone, and calcite alabaster. The primary ones that I want you to focus on are the Africano appears here, Giallo Antico, and Porta Santa. Mountain Palace at Herodium. We have the upper palace here. We have the lower palace that's, well, and they're trying to figure out what to call the lower thing over here. They're calling it now a palace or a platform, plus the bathhouse. All the guest facilities were down there. The monumental building is down over here, the theater, and of course, the mausoleum. Here in Lower Herodium, the stones were all from local materials, from the black bitumen and the pink limestone. Upper Herodium is a totally different story. In the triclinium, up in the upper palace, this is what you usually call the synagogue area. It was paved with square tiles set on a diagonal. And it turns out that almost all of these tiles are marble. Now, we haven't found a single complete tile, only a bunch of little tiny fragments, but how do we know this is a marble floor and not a limestone floor? You have to look at the impressions. The marble tiles were cut flat like this, so they leave a flat impression down on the plaster. The bitumen tiles and limestone tiles have a peak like this on the back, so they leave a deep pocket down in here. So if you look here, you will see this is a very flat impression that has been left here. You can see the stick line right on it, very flat impression. In fact, the first time I looked at these pictures with Roy and Jakob, I'm going, they're all flatbacks. This is all marble. And they go, oh, this couldn't be just a marble floor. I'm going, yeah, look, it's flatbacks. And they go, no, that really is deeper. You just don't see in the picture. And then I had a picture where they had a small, one of these little sticks that was lying right on it. I'm going, look guys, it's perfectly flat. This is a totally marble floor. Then we started finding lots of little tiny pieces of marble going, wow, this is really neat. Now it turns out there's a little decorative line that goes through here that has the deeper pockets. So this was either the bitumen or the limestone in it. And the different stones that we found there, once we knew to start looking for these ancient marbles, we see the ones I want you to keep an eye on: Africano, Giallo Antico, and Porta Santa, plus some of the other other stones again. Also at Herodium, we have a very lovely labyrinth, or a huge basin that was made out of white marble. So that tells us some white marble came in, but it was not used for floor tiles. It's used for things like basins and bowls and things like that. When we go to Masada, there in the upper palace, our floors are made out of the local limestone and bitumen. However, we have objects that have been found there that were made out of the alabaster, the Egyptian alabaster, the flowery alabaster, and the Africano. Now, what I have of this flowery alabaster, oh, I should have brought it. I actually have it here at my house. I should have run over to the box and pull it out. I have a slab of alabaster fiorito. We have no idea where they use slabs. However, we do know one thing. When we see the frescoes on the walls down at the lower levels of the palace, look what it's made to look like. It's made to look like the alabaster fiorito. So this one slab of alabaster that I have from Masada may in fact be the model, where the mason was saying to the painter there, make it look like this. Okay. So that's kind of important to find one piece of that, and only one piece at Masada. Machaerus, on the other side of the Jordan, there the tiles were found, we only have limestone and bitumen. The tiles that I do know where they are, they're at Mississippi State University, and I saw them over at Mississippi one time. But we also find some carved slabs. There is a slab of Porfido Rosso, I think it's a part of a slab of a tabletop. And then Porta Santa, I can tell by the carving of this is part of the support pillar for a rectangular table. So we've got this Porta Santa over here. That's one of the ones you're supposed to be watching for. Kypros, up on the ridgeline above Jericho. Here we have the entire floor being made out of imported tiles, plus some of the local calcite alabaster. It seems like this calcite alabaster was cut and valued the same as imported marble. So the different tiles that we found, we have 5 varieties. Again, the ones we want to kind of watch for: Africano, Giallo Antico, and Porta Santa. Here is our bathtub again at Kypros, and here's part of the Kypros floor right here. It was included within the display here at the museum. Up at Banyas, this is the hilltop Opus Reticulatum building at Banyas that we're now calling Here the Great's Palace up there. This has one of the biggest varieties of the imported stones. I have at least, what did I put on here? I have to do this over, okay, at least 16 different kinds of stones that were found here, plus local bitumen and limestone. Here again, watch for Africano, the alabaster fiorito, lots of other alabasters in here. This is this Breccia di Tiberias, Breccia di Aleppo, which is not from Aleppo. I have no idea how it got its name. Giallo Antico, Porta Santa. There I actually did have 2 white marble tiles, but it seems like in this case, white had been brought in just as an example of another color of stone. It wasn't brought because it specifically was white. Here at Antipas' palace in Tiberias, sitting right beside the Sea of Galilee, right beside the Canary. There we have 6 different kinds of tiles, or 6 different varieties of stone that were here. Again, the Africano, Giallo Antico, Porta Santa are some of the most prevalent ones. Here, there was a lot of Breccia di Tiberias that was left behind, but the reason is that Breccia di Tiberias tends to break very easily on every one of these veins. And so the tiles that are in the floor, still made out of these, are broken into 100 pieces. They've just cracked that way. This is a chart now, don't have to read through the whole thing. This is a chart of all the different kinds of stones I found at all the different palaces. X means it was a tile, and O means it's an object that I found at those sites. Now, from this list, I needed to remove stones that continued to be used on into the late Roman and to the Byzantine period, because at this point I was trying to figure out specifically what can I say was Herodian and not late Roman and not Byzantine. So anything that continued to be used into the late Roman and Byzantine periods, I had to exclude. Now, I've got only a few places that I can use for this exclusion process. There's a late Roman basilica building in Ashkelon that I'm working with, so I've seen their materials, so I know what late Roman looks like there. I'm working with Beit Sharim, which has a late Roman basilica building and a late Roman synagogue building, so I can tell what late Roman looks like there. And the other thing is the columns that are in the Dome of the Rock and the Dome of the Chain, because those columns came out of Byzantine churches. Therefore, that is a really good sample of what Byzantine looks like. Okay, so I had to exclude certain things because of that. That left me with a shorter list, and when I added Caesarea onto it, you can see I had a lot of stones, specifically of the Africano, the Alabaster Fiorito, over here, Giallo Antico, the Porta Santa. I did have one of the Breccia Pavonazza, not worrying too much about that one, but we're concerned with these ones. We have lots of tiles. So these tell me, these are the ones that appear almost exclusively from the Herodian period. So these are the ones that I can say were pretty much, these were from the Herodian period. We did have one area in the excavation where we had some things in a context, not in situ, but in a context. And it's this area right here. It's the area that was ramps or stairs at various times that led from the upper palace down to the lower palace. In here, there is one particular layer that was added on sometime late in the 1st century. All the pottery in here is 1st century pottery. Therefore, we know the things that were in here had been used either at the end of the 1st century BCE, and now were used at the beginning of the 1st century CE. They went out of use, and the rubble was included in this debris layer. And in here, we had Africano. I had a bunch of the Giallo Antico. It did have a lot of Pavonazzetto, which I had excluded because it keeps getting used later on in the Byzantine period. But here I know it came specifically from the Herodian period, and also the Porta Santa. So we know that these imported stones were used in the Herodian period: Giallo Antico, Alabaster Fiorito, Africano, Porta Santa, and then the one lone piece of Breccia Pavonazza. So for the Herodian period, we have evidence of imported stone use in the Herodian period because we compared what was at Caesarea to the other Herodian palaces. The main things included Africano, Alabaster Fiorito, Giallo Antico, and Porta Santa. And then we know that imported stone use was limited to the Opus Sectile tiles in the Herodian period. We do not see it used architecturally in any other fashion. Now, we're trying to determine the materials from the late Roman period. This is a study that's been carried on by Moshe Fisher from down at Tel Aviv University. He's now retired from there. He has been looking at the Roman importation system and the Roman system of marble from all around the Mediterranean. And the stones came in here mostly in the second and third centuries, continued on somewhat into the Byzantine period. Primary uses, which were architectural elements in public monumental buildings, also for sculptures and for sarcophagi. And about 80% of all the architectural marble that came in is the white Proconessian marble. That's this white with the gray streaks in it. We also see a lot of white marble and a lot of the Cipollino Verde. This means green onion skin, or green onions. Cipollino in Italian is onion, and because of the layers in it, it's called green onion. These three marbles account for over 1/2 of all the tiles that I cataloged. So we know that during this time, they were using a lot of this material, these three particular varieties, because none of these came in to Israel during the Herodian period. They're found only in late Roman and Byzantine periods and onward from there, but not prior to that. The most common uses is for wall revetments. One of the things they would do is take a slab, take 4 consecutive slices of it, rearrange them into really neat patterns. They would do it with 2 patterns or 4 patterns. You can actually see this on the outside of the Dome of the Rock where they've done this. They use them for floor pavement slabs and also for Opus Sectile tiles. Now, how do we know if something was used for a wall slab? Down at Caesarea, we don't have any walls that are standing to any great height, so we don't have anything still with these wall panels on it. But there are typical characteristics of these. Typically, there are this Proconessian marble, sometimes white, sometimes the green. Thickness is usually 1.5 to 2.5 centimeters. Lots of times it's going to have these holes on the side. These holes were used to insert a pin that was embedded into the wall to make sure that the tile, or the front facing of the tile, was the proper distance from the wall, so that you get a nice smooth wall when you have several tiles there. There was plaster that filled in between the marble slab itself and the original wall. So you'll find these anchor holes that are in the side of them. You'll also find things called torus molding strips. These are narrow bands that have this curved front edge on them, or the curved top edge on them. You can see the curved edge on each one of these. These are really easy to see on the Dome of the Rock. They were used as dividers between the different slabs, just for decoration. So whenever you're dealing with wall revetments, you're going to find these torus molding strips. Sometimes you'll actually see mortises, or these holes in walls. Like I said, we don't see them down in Caesarea because we don't have any walls standing up but about this high. This is a picture from Herodium, which is the small Umayyad palace at the northwest corner of the Sea of Galilee. So from the late Roman period, we know that Caesarea was the marble import city for Israel. We do not have any in situ slabs, but we know, so we can't differentiate between which ones were put up in late Roman and which ones are put up in Byzantine. I had to clump all these together. And over half the slabs that I had were these 3 varieties of marble that were probably used in Roman and Byzantine buildings as wall slabs. But very few late Roman excavations have revealed any kind of Opus Sectile tiles. So I don't think they added on any. These were renovations that happened during this time. Herod's walls originally in there were fresco, because we have fresco remains. They were fresco, then they got paved over with the marble slabs in the late Roman to the Byzantine period. Now, determine the materials of the Byzantine period. You saw these the last program I did when I talked about all these really curly Q tiles that were found down in Caesarea. The Opus Sectile workshop that was found in Caesarea is only 150 meters northeast of the palace. Now, did they use that workshop to make the tiles at the palace? Probably not. We think that workshop was a workshop for that house, that mansion right there. There would have been a workshop for the palace to work on the tiles from the palace. Again, I showed you this picture the last time. All these thousands and thousands of little tiny curly Q tiles that were made into prefabricated panels to be used either on floors or walls. Again, the panels were made by laying the prepared, cut, and polished tiles flat down on a surface, put a plaster over the top of it. They used the pink Opus Sectile. It's pink because it's got the little tiny crushed pottery in it. And then a matrix of pottery shards was put on the top of it. This would solidify into a great big piece of something that looks like plywood, but it's plystone, and it would be laid in on the floors. Here's a picture of a Roman mason. This is from the Bath Diocletian. Shows this guy working on this. He's got his panel set up on 4, I don't care what you call them, sawhorses, or here in Israel they call them mules, set up here. The guy is working on it. He's got this pot with a stick, so it looks like he might be getting ready to spread plaster over top of this. And then this panel then, with its pottery shards on the top, would be ready to be laid onto a wall or a floor. Here's a floor that was found on the Mount of Olives by Bliss and Dickey that had these really, really intricate floors on them. And they said when they went down beneath the level of the tiles, they revealed that a matrix of potsherds had been laid on the native clay with a pavement placed on that. What they didn't realize is that they were seeing the flipped over prefabricated panel. These are tiles that I have from Caesarea that appear to be from this Byzantine period. these really curvy things. Looks like a fleur-de-lis without the centerpiece. So we put a little leaf-shaped piece in between. Now, this is giallo antico. If it were being used here in the Byzantine period, it means that it is a tile that's in secondary use, meaning they've taken an older tile and they have cut it up into smaller pieces. Here's another piece of it here. How do we know that? Because by the time you get to the Byzantine period, this quarry had been out of use for 200 or 300 years. Therefore, they're reusing stones that they were already finding in the Caesarea area. In fact, the only place that I find I've seen these Byzantine tiles made out of giallo antico that have been recut is at Caesarea. Every other place where I've seen these kind of tiles used, they're not using it. So it was just quirky for down at Caesarea. They happen to have a lot of these stones left lying around that they could use. We did find one sample of two tiles still stuck together. It's a piece of Pavonazzetto with a piece of Cipollino Rosso Antico that was still attached to it. Absolutely one, that's all. Out of 1,500 pieces, found two tiles stuck together. Another marble object that came out of Caesarea is this piece of marble. It's carved. You can see the shape of it here. It's the edge of what's called a crow's beak table. Looks like a crow's beak. Here's a larger one from Herodium that's put together of like 5 different pieces over here to give you a better idea of what these tables look like. They could be used as a tray and set upon another table, or I think they would be put upon some kind of a tripod system, and it was used as an independent table. So a piece of that, the white marble was found there at, the Byzantine white marble was found at Caesarea. So for the Byzantine period, I had over 200 tiles that are very consistent with what has been found at the workshop, just 150 meters to the north of the palace. So these tiles were manufactured, put into use down in the palace at approximately the same time as that workshop up in the residential area, 150 meters to the north. And that has been dated by the excavators to the late 6th, early 7th century. Now, the archaeologists who were working on the IAA part of the palace, the original date that they gave was they thought the palace went out of use sometime in the late 5th or early 6th century. But because we have these kind of tiles, these fancy little curly Q tiles up here, that we know were still being manufactured and used. In fact, we don't even find them in earlier Byzantine churches. They're found in later Byzantine churches, usually towards the time of the Muslim destruction of the Byzantine churches. So, you know, closer to the early 600s, then we know that this building probably did not go out of use until the late 6th century, maybe even the early 7th century. So for the Herodian period, we can assume then that Herod decorated the Promontory Palace using Opus Sectile tiles of imported marbles that are exactly the same kinds that he was importing for all the rest of his palaces. The renovations during late Roman and Byzantine period were primarily the replacement of Herod's fresco walls with wall revetments made out of marble. And in the Byzantine period, we see some more renovations in the building where they were using those pretty little curly Q tiles. So, and it would have lasted then until the 6th or 7th century. So the Promontory Palace was probably in use for close to 600 years. Thank you. I hope you found this interesting. It's a little technical on some of it. I will do the stop sharing and go in here and look at chats. Okay. Please repeat the shallow imprints. Okay. Flat is marble. Somebody else wrote flat is marble. Yeah. Okay. When they cut the marble was cut into very thin, flat slabs. It probably had to do with the cost of the material. So therefore, they would do it in thinner pieces. Remember, it's going to be supported by plaster underneath it. In fact, at pick a place, Jericho, we've got some tiles that are about 3 millimeters thick. And people say, oh, this couldn't have been on a floor. Well, yeah, it could have been. You know, it's on good solid plaster underneath it. It's not going anyplace. You only need to see the top of it. So the marble was sliced very thin. However, the bitumen and the limestone tiles, which were local materials, when they were carved, they're flat on the top, but they were carved down so it had a peak at the bottom of it. So it leaves a deep impression down in the plaster. So you can look at the floors and say, okay, this over here, this is an imported marble tile, and this one over here, this is either limestone or bitumen. You can't tell which of the two, but you can tell that it's a local stone. Thanks. So you just can put the last summary slide up again. Yes, I can go back and share the screen, go back in here, go to the last summary one. Okay, let me get rid of the chat in here or move that over. Does that help? There's your last summary screen there. And then I want to thank you guys very much. Sorry for all the technical stuff in here. I hope you learned a little bit about stones from this. When I came here, I mean, I had always been a rock collector, but I didn't deal with stones until I got here and started working the Opus Sectile tiles. And then I had to learn all of this stuff. And that's because when I first started working with the tiles and working with all these marbles, the first person, of course, that I contacted was Moshe Fisher. And I said, hey, I need help with all these colored tiles. And he goes, I don't do the color tiles. My work doesn't start until after that importation. I start with the importation of the white marbles. So we said, you know, the person that knows this is Lorenzo Lazzarini. He lives in Venice. Here's his email, be in touch with him. So Lorenzo was the person that I worked with on a lot of this. I have met him several times at conferences and a couple times when he was visiting over here in Israel. So I had to learn it all. And then by going around and looking at all the different Herodian sites, we know a lot more now collectively about what Herod was doing in his palaces, because you've got one person looking at 8 palaces plus the Temple Mount, rather than, you know, one person looking at each of them. Nebuchadnezzar knew about the discovery of all these tiles, these different places, but his major focus at the time was on the general architecture structure of all these buildings. And he had not gotten around to doing the individual study of little tiny broken tiles. So that's what I inherited after he passed away. So my career is based on the work that was started by Nebuchadnezzar. Anything else? Other people have questions. I can do this here. I'm going to stop sharing the screen so I can get a full review. Does anybody have any other questions? If either you can unmute yourselves or if Judy can unmute you. If people have questions, I can answer them for you.
Yeah, if I could ask one more time.
Sure.
The bathtub at Kypros.
Yes.
Local calcite alabaster?
Local, yes. It is probably from a Aboud cave.
Right. And
yeah.
Do you have a record, like how many tiles were found in the Masada bathhouse?
Okay, in the, let's see, in the Tiberias. I'm writing an article right now on marble salvaging. Have I been doing with these numbers all week? Yes. Okay. In the Tiberias, there is one triangle of black bitumen, and then there's a couple pieces of rectangular little strips that are set alongside. They were filling in between where the pattern stopped and the wall. Okay.
I was asking something else. I'm sorry. Oh. Excuse me. Like you said, like for example, you gave the example that in Jericho, they
25,000.
Something like right. 25,000 to 26,000 tiles. So yes. that's what I was asking. In Masada,
okay. How many tiles I have not calculated them yet. In this report that I'm writing, I worked on when I work on Masada, like on Thursday or Friday, I was working on Masada. I have inserted in there the size of the room and the size of the tiles, okay? Right. But I have not yet gone back to calculate exactly how many were in each of these places, okay? There were none left in the Tiberias, except for one. There were none left in the Caldarium. However, there are a bunch of tiles in the Apoditarium. But what you have to know about those is that they are non-standard size tiles. They're Herod's triangles, okay? It's not a standard size. So evidently those got left behind by the salvagers, whereas in the other two rooms, they were prime for salvaging and resale. So there's nothing left there. But we do have the tile impressions. So yes, I can go back and calculate it. I eventually will, but I have not done that yet.
All right, so
So I
next time
did
I'll
it
go
at
there, I'll
Jericho
count.
just because of the size of the room. Oh, wait a minute. I actually did it. Oh, crud. I did it. Wait a minute. One of the rooms has about 1,500 tiles. One of them has around 1,000, and one had about 2,500. Now, that's off the top of my head. Yeah, I did sit here and calculate it out the other day. If I go get my Masada book, in the picture where the page is, I have a little slip of paper thrown in there. So those are about the numbers. So you're looking at under 5,000.
All righty, good. As you said, next time I'll count.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Frankie, thank you very, very much. Guys, this was wonderful. Frankie, this was great, always great. And we'll talk about when we can actually go there in person and do that. Okay. Guys, tomorrow we have, I'm actually giving something tomorrow.
Good for you.
Thank you. And also on Wednesday we have Usher. So we'll see you guys hopefully tomorrow. Have a great day.
Thank you, Frankie. It was great.